I'm Denton Davidson for Gold Derby, and I'm happy to be hosting this spotlight panel for the documentary Louis Armstrong's Black and Blues, which is streaming on Apple TV Plus. With me today are director Sacha Jenkins, editors Alma Herrera-Pazmino and Jason Pollard, animator Hectah Arias, and archival producer Amilca Palmer. Thank you all for joining me. It's fun to see everyone together that worked on this film. I just want to start off. This film's been so well received. How exciting is that for all of you to be nominated for these awards and recognized with the critics? You know, what does that mean for you as individuals and the film as a whole and how it's being seen? Sacha, I'll start with you.
Well, I think it's great that Mr. Armstrong is finally getting his just due. You know, it's great that he's back in the back center stage and part of the general conversation. To me, that in and of itself is a victory.
And Hector, how about for you with the Cinema Eye nomination that you got going on?
It's exciting, I don't know. It's good.
Amilca, you said you attended the Critics' Choice Documentary Awards last night. What was that experience like for you?
Oh, it was fantastic. It was wonderful to be in that room of incredibly talented documentary filmmakers, and it was wonderful to have this work acknowledged. And yeah, similar to what Sacha said, some of our heroes of the past, they lose their resonance, and I think this is a film that is reminding people of how great Louis Armstrong remains and how he should stay an important person in our sort of mind's eye in our culture.
And Jason, how has this been for you? You've been doing this for a while. What's this experience been like?
As everybody said, it's been fantastic. Again, as Sacha said, just to piggyback on what he said, just to get Louis to get his credit, the ability and the privilege to show another side of Louis is fantastic. So I'm glad that people are able to see another side of him. I'm glad it opens up the door for people to do more research on Louis if they want to. It's just fantastic, and I'm grateful that the work is out there and that people are enjoying it.
And Alma, how about you?
Yeah, just echoing what all my peers have said and Sacha, especially great to be able to put something out there from Louis's perspective and be able to hear his voice from all the archival that we're able to get from the Louis Armstrong House Museum.
And Sacha, this is a pretty straightforward question, but we see him performing Black and Blue at the beginning of the film. Why did you decide to name the documentary after that?
Well, that song says it all. He's talking about my only sin is in my skin. He didn't make that idea up, America did. And so as a great American, to sort of see a great American sort of exercise his feelings and, just a very simple idea of when you get struck, you might, you look at your skin and come away with the black and blue. So for a litany of reasons, it just felt right. It felt like it completely articulated the thesis of the film and what Mr. Armstrong had to deal with his entire life and his entire career.
And in that opening, Orson Welles introduces Louis. And I was also curious why that introduction in particular was significant for you and why you wanted to use that to start the film.
Well, Orson Welles is Orson Welles, right? I mean, Rosebud. I mean, it doesn't get any more classically American, classically respected, big man on campus, worshiping at the feet of Mr. Armstrong. That just shows you who he was and where he was at that time of his life and where he was in American culture. That was a big deal to get, blessed by Orson Welles. But really, Orson Welles felt blessed to be blessing Mr. Armstrong. That's what's great about it, So it's a reciprocal kind of thing.
Amilca, maybe this segues over to you a bit, but there's so much archival footage in this movie. The photos, the interviews, and just the imagery of, the Black experience in history, way back to the 30s. What was your first thought when you were called to be part of this project? What went through your mind initially?
I mean, my first reaction was, what a privilege to be in Lewis's stuff. You know, I mean, he had the presence of mind and a sense of his own importance that he was collecting on his own life from very, very early on. So I'd say, you know, a good 50-60% of the material that we use is actually in Armstrong's own collection, you know, his audio tapes, his scrapbooks, his clippings, his photographs and snapshots. And then he was someone who was, you know, at the top of his game in music, in film. You know, he was being photographed, he was being documented every day of his life by outside organizations. So we were pulling from outside as well. So it was just overwhelming. And I think we knew early on that we would not get everything that exists on him, that we had to be really focused. What was the thesis? What were we trying to say? We were guided by Lewis's own voice, his own sort of narration of his own life to kind of direct us. Where would we go? Where would we search? What were we looking for?
How many hours or is that? Like, how do you decide even where to start to bring that down into something that can be used in, you know, a 2-hour film?
I mean, maybe I would defer to Jason and Alma on that, because I think the audio recordings, there were, in his own collection, there are about 750 reel-to-reels. So there's an A-side, a B-side. We're talking 1,500 hours of material, and it's just conversation. It's him recording recordings, music, his own television appearances. And I think it was that the process of sifting through that might have been really where the editing process started. So,
Jason or Alma, do you want to talk about that? And just how much audio were you dealing with and trying to bring that down into what you could use for the film?
I can start, and Jason, if you want to pick up. Yeah, it was really a team effort, and it was the compass of the thesis of the film, what was going to serve Lewis's experience. There are a lot of great things to hear. I mean, you can hear all of the Lewises in Lewis, you know, him at his highest, him at a hotel, him high at home. All the ways that he exists, he recorded himself. So there was a plethora to choose from, but it really came down to what's going to serve the purpose of this specific story, and who do we have to corroborate that story with? Because we also had to make sure we could balance his voice with other voices, whether it was his family members, his wives, people he traveled with, other musicians, people that witnessed him. So it was kind of finding a thread across themes, a thread across stories, and then also the support of reading all these transcripts. Everything was transcribed, and the archival team did a great job of also helping us find bites, and the producers as well. So it was a big treasure hunt, I would say, guided by the voice of Lewis.
Yeah, and just to go a little bit further, it's just, you know, as Alma said, we were just looking for particular themes to hit. And Sacha and producer Julie Anderson came up with the idea of creating pods about Lewis's life. You know, so Alma created a Miro board, which is kind of a virtual index card or virtual kind of push pin board. And we would go over the different pods in Lewis's life in chronological order. And we would identify which pods or which stories were most important. And then, as Alma also said, the tricky part is that, you know, Lewis sometimes tells the story incompletely, or it's not the clearest, you know, whether because he's high or whatever, or just the accent or what have you. So we just had to have different collaborators kind of fill in the gaps and fill in the holes with the story. So it's definitely a treasure hunt and putting together different pieces of the puzzle of Lewis's life.
And he recorded these himself. He had this library, and he would record people just coming over and having conversations. Did you hear anything that was just really entertaining, that like it made no sense to put it in the film, but was there anyone in there that you were just like, I can't believe, you know, this guy was, or this woman was in his living room just recording conversations?
Not that I remember. I mean, I'm trying to think, not any big names, but there was some jazz notables. His jazz contemporaries were there. That was interesting to me, you know. Go ahead, Amilca, you want to say something?
He was once recording his wife, and his wife didn't know, and they had an argument. She screamed at him to turn this off. So I think it just spoke to how much he was recording, just continuously all aspects of his kind of day-to-day life. And he would travel also. He had the two recording, he had those two tape recorders installed in his library, but he also had these portable recording devices that he would travel around the world with. So,
Sacha, what for you was, impressive the most about Amilca and Jason and Alma's work and pulling together all of this archival footage? What was their importance? Brag about them, say things that they wouldn't say about themselves.
Oh, I mean, all of them are on fire right now. Like, I'll probably never get to work with them again because they're going to be in such demand. But yeah, all that went into this thing is they say it takes a village. It really did, but the villagers had great level of communication considering it was COVID. Needle in a haystack, everyone's sort of being charged with finding the best of the best, and everyone enthusiastically looking for the best of the best, and then coming back together and communicating and looking at these pods and thinking about what's going to be the most interesting, most compelling. And so again, with the handicap of COVID, when you consider all that was done, it's pretty amazing. But everyone really, I don't know if take it personally is the right way to describe it, but everyone took great pride in the project, because as you get to know this guy, which I think is the goal of the film, by the end of the film, you feel like you know this guy, because he left so many deeply personal things behind that we luckily had access to, that by the end, you feel like you know this guy. And I think that everyone really felt like they knew this guy and wanted to do right by this guy and wanted to really push to get how he felt out there. And, we all realized that in his lifetime, he felt like how he really felt wasn't out there, that he was widely misunderstood. He went to his grave thinking that. And so I think everyone took great pride in knowing that we could correct that, or at least articulate for him what he couldn't articulate in life. So everyone took great pride in the work.
And when we don't see those incredible archival pieces, we're seeing the animation of Hectah. And Hectah, this is a unique style that you have. It just adds so much to the film, just the slight movements that you illustrate. It feels almost like you're scrapbooking in a lot of it. How was your process for this? Are you given audio and video, or are you told what to illustrate? What's your general process?
I'm given audio, but it almost feels like Lewis was like the creative director, because it's matching his scrapbooks and his art. So it was kind of a blessing, but then I felt kind of like the way John Oliver does in the movie, where I'm like, man, he's going to outshine me. Like, I got to do something with this and make it look good and animate it, because it was so good, his stuff, that I was like, I got to match it and kind of bring it to life. So, but to answer your question, yeah, I would receive audio and take direction from Sacha and work with the team and hit up Amilca, And
what's your illustration process then? And technically, how is this what you're typically doing, or was this a different way of doing art for you?
It's a mix. It's a combination. I do physical art, I do digital art, so it allowed me to tap into different skills, a lot of scanning, a lot of trial and error. The tape, for example, took me, I don't know. I scanned so much different tapes. I was putting stuff in the oven to kind of give it, make it wrinkle and give it that age look, and a lot of fails, but yeah, it was fun. It's a little frustrating at times where you're like, oh man, I'm just not getting it. But then when you get it, you're like, oh man, this is coming together.
How did you initially link up with Sacha? Because you've worked together before. What's that connection, and how did you two initially meet?
Just years. Just years of working on stuff.
Sacha, what impresses you about Hectah? What does his illustrations bring to the project?
Hector is not a normal person. Like he's not. His skill level is just on another. His creativity is on another level. We work together at a place called Mass Appeal, which is, I'm a partner at a place called Mass Appeal. It's a production company, creative agency, blah blah blah. Heck was there before me when it was under a different name. So we met at least 11 years ago, and we had a kinship because he's from Brooklyn and I'm from Queens, and hip hop and other things, people in common. And I try to work with him as much as I can because he gets it. He gets where I'm coming from, but he brings his own thing to the table that I could never do, and he just enhances the work in such great ways. And Jason's someone I've worked with a bunch. Alma now is working on another project, and Amilca, she worked on this Wu-Tang series I did. So I have to say that imagine when you look at the complexion of the people on this team, it's rare that you have something so mainstream as at least mainstream companies working with this many people of color. So I think that should be noted that not only are they people of color, but they are superstars of color. So it's almost like the Avengers or some Marvel team up of people that came together to make this thing. So I was very lucky.
Alma and Jason, the editing for this film is a huge undertaking because it's video, interviews, animation, audio, over the top of photos. I mean, it's moving. I mean, it's a fast-paced movie. What was your biggest challenge on this project? I'll start with Jason.
The biggest challenge I think for us was, hitting the story points, moving the story forward. Meaning that, for some strange reason, I decided to challenge myself and try to use as little narration or, little the voice of God as possible, right? I really wanted Lewis to guide us along. And, halfway or a third going into it, I was sitting in front of my home computer, as I am now. I was like, holy shit, this is insane. Excuse my language. This is crazy, because as I said before, Lewis talks in a serpentine sort of way, right? Where he goes around stories and he assumes, because he's talking to friends, he assumes there's a prior knowledge to the stories that he's telling. And, there's a prior, he doesn't have to, he leaves out certain parts of the story because he assumes, he's talking to his friends so they know the story. So he kind of starts in the middle of stories, doesn't quite end them. They're not perfectly, perfectly formed bites. So for me, I don't know what Alma's going to say, but the biggest challenge was putting together the entire story as we go from, as I said before, story pod to story pod to story pod to story pod. Like one of the biggest challenges, and it seems really easy, was getting into the story of how Lewis was arrested as a young child for shooting a gun in the air. And finally, I think one day I just said, you know what, just give me some narration, where there was an old radio production about Lewis's life, and they gave me the date, what happened, and then I could go into Lewis's recounting of that tale. So that was one of the biggest challenges for me.
Yeah, echoing all that Jason has said, I think that was really the biggest challenge, was kind of synthesizing all the pods. I think before we had created pods, we also were doing things chronologically. So there's a lot missing in the beginning of Lewis's life that's not documented about him because it's so early on, that we have so much more towards the end of his life. So finding a balance between that. I think we're also challenged with finding something to thread everything together, which is really where the animation came in. Because threading, we were looking for something like one solid interview that covered all the beats, or a couple at least. And we were really hoping, we didn't really get to talk about this last time, but we were hoping to really use this other documentary that the archival team was able to get from Rutgers University called A Boy from New Orleans, that we also had to manually sync ourselves, and had so many gems in there. But unfortunately, we weren't able to really succinctly use it in a structured way. So I think the structuring really came down to what we could have succinct of Lewis's bites, who could help us tell that story as well from another perspective, and how much archival do we actually have to cover that. That isn't wallpaper archival, but really active archival that that engages the viewer and really resonates with what the sentiment is of that story. So all of that over the time that we worked together, I think we did the best that we could with what we had. And I think it really honors the life of Lewis.
How do you two work together in that, what's that dynamic? Are you each taking pieces? Are you together in a room for every frame? Like, are you sick of each other by the end of this? What's that whole dynamic like?
Jason is definitely sick of me. Yes.
Well, the good thing about Alma, why I enjoyed working with her, she is super organized. You know, she makes a spreadsheet. Like I said, she makes a mural board. She really organizes all the thoughts and notes together. Where me, I'm a little bit more freelance and freestyle with my thoughts and ideas. So the way we would work is I would have an idea, Alma would take it down, you know, eventually I would take the first half, I would tell her to take the second half, and we'd meet someplace in the middle. And we watch each other's halves and we give notes to one another. Like, I think this could work here, that could work there, this could work here. You know, Alma was crucial where, you know, when we're talking about structure, one idea I was struggling with was, all right, Lewis isn't giving us what we want audio wise. Let's get some of his books, because thankfully, a lot of his letters, you know, Lewis was a great letter writer. So a lot of his letters were put together in a compilation in a book. So Alma went through all the letters and she pulled out bits and pieces. And those bits and pieces of the letters are what Nas reads throughout the film. And that part is super crucial to the film because, again, it provides that kind of, you know, it provides that bridge to the different parts. You know, for example, when we go into 1931 New Orleans, if we don't have Lewis saying that bit from his letter, I'm still not sure to this day how we get into that 1931 New Orleans performance, right? When Lewis talks about being on the road, again, we have the letter. When Lewis talks about he's the first artist who played all these segregated hotels, but he got a room. He got into the front door. Again, that's letter work. So, you know, Alma being really, really on top of it and really organized, really helped me as an editor, you know, get into the flow. And then, you know, she's a great editor, you know, in herself. So she was able to find her flow as well. She cut some of the best sequences in the film.
Oh, thank you, Jason. Also, just to echo, yes, everything that Jason said. On top of that, we were remote, so we only were in the room together maybe 4 or 5 times, and not even editing together, just like talking about the edit that we just put together and I exported. So it really took a lot of phone calls, a lot of back and forth over Google Docs, commenting. I think because Jason had also worked with Sacha before, he had a lot of knowledge around really where this was going and like what would work, what wouldn't. Jason really brought in the element of hip hop, as he was saying, that Sacha really called in to this film by freestyling. And I felt like it was really like a cipher between us, where Jason would really put his thoughts onto a timeline, share that with me. I send it back. So it was like really going back and forth off of what we found interesting, what we found worked, and then scratching it. So lots of egos aside and just putting the work at the center was really important to the communication and the trial and error that we had to really focus on.
What surprised everyone the most about Louis Armstrong? I mean, I knew the bare bones basics, you know, before this. I knew he was a trumpet player. I knew his musicality, but I didn't know he grew up in the red light district, delivering coal to prostitutes, and had that exposure, and then ended up being in a boys' home, a home for boys, which he called an orphanage, and didn't play trumpet until he was 13 years old. All of that surprised me. Hectah, what surprised you the most while you were part of this documentary?
I think the Queens thing. I didn't know a lot about going into this about Louis Armstrong. I remember watching the first, like, when I got brought in, watching like a rough cut, and I went through a range of emotions. Like, it was like pride, like I laughed, I cried, everything. I was like, man, I was excited to be part of the project, but you know, there's a lot of ties with it that I was like, oh man, you know, my dad died in the hospital, or like my grandma's handwriting looks like that. But I think, yeah, I didn't know a lot. So like, I kind of knew he had some ties to Queens, but I didn't know, you know, the house was there and all those things. So for me, it was like learning all of this.
Amilca, how about for you?
I think that I had pretty much bought the line that he had sold out, or that he was sort of a commercial entertainer. And I think this gave me a much deeper appreciation for who he was. And maybe the moment when he goes to Ghana, I think stands out to me. That's in the film. And, I think that he felt so connected. He sees a woman who's dancing and he says, that woman looks just like my mother. And that he felt this sort of connection to Ghana, Africa, and had I think from that point on, he really was convinced that that's where his people were from, his ancestry, his family. And to me, I know when I was growing up, even, and I'm born decades after, many decades after Louis Armstrong, that he would embrace his African roots, his African self, I thought was a really very powerful sort of declaration to me, that he knew who he was and that he had a tremendous sense of pride. And I had to just reevaluate my own sense of how I'd categorized him, kind of put him in a box. So
he was called an Uncle Tom. I mean, he was within the Black community not respected for generations because of what he was portraying and what he was doing for white audiences, while everyone else was suffering. And this brings a lot of that into the forefront. Jason, what surprised you, or can you speak on that subject?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as a younger Black male, there's definitely times where you think Louis is an Uncle Tom. I mean, to put it straight, you always question, for me, I always question, did you have to do it like that, Louis? Did you have to, comport yourself in that way sometimes? And the most surprising thing is that, you find throughout the tapes and the audio, look, you have to, as Sacha would say, you have to walk in somebody's shoes. You have to realize that this is a man born in New Orleans in the early 1900s, not that far away from slavery, right? So he has to figure a way to comport himself in public and survive, not only survive, but thrive as an entertainer, which was, extremely rare, obviously, in those days. So, there's, for me, there wasn't the consideration to think about all the work, all of the personal pain, all of the doubts, that went into that. I really but before working on this film, I didn't give Louis his proper credit. I thought he was a great musician, but, all the personal stuff that he had to go through and continue to go through, to maintain a career, to maintain a successful life through, 70 plus years is phenomenal. So I'm happy, I'm grateful to have worked on the film and really been exposed to those elements.
And this sort of fits in with that. The Star Spangled Banner is a hot topic in our country even now. I mean, and what it means to Black people. Some say it doesn't represent Black people. There's, of course, the kneeling debate that's going on. There's a pretty solid segment of this film about Louis's Star Spangled Banner and what it meant to him and how it changed the way many Black people felt about the song at that time. Sacha, why did you want to highlight that?
Well, because as a huge Jimi Hendrix fan, I always, heard about how when he played the Star Spangled Banner the way he did, it was so controversial and people were upset about it. And then you go back and you realize that Armstrong had done it decades before. And then you realize there's a tradition of Black artists, using music as a way to give you the temperature of how Black people feel. And that's why I feel like, in doing all these projects, whether it's Rick James, Wu-Tang Clan, or Louis Armstrong, there's a consistency here. And what's the consistency? They're Black in America, and they're in environments where the education is lacking, where the opportunities are lacking. And what are you going to do? You're going to express yourself. So you're raised with this Star Spangled Banner. It's drilled into your mind, but what does it really mean to you? Well, for a lot of Black people, it means love of country in spite of country not loving them back. And I think that's a very important idea for people to wrap their heads around, especially in the climate that we're in now, that Black people believe it or not, still love America when America hasn't always loved us. And wanting to sort of sign up for the brochure that America put out there about, equality and opportunities and equal rights, Louis Armstrong was just trying to get everyone to sort of live up to that brochure. He's trying to get America to live up to that brochure. And the Star Spangled Banner was an example of that. He's letting you know that I'm still here, I'm still an American, I'm still proud to be an American, but here's how I feel as an American right now, and here's why.
Amilca, just to change the subject, I loved his wife in this film. So I'm curious what it was like for you going through sort of that footage, hearing her stories. I love especially the one about her buying a house without him knowing it. She just brought so much light and so much fun to the documentary. What did you learn about their relationship and in this process? Or what was your favorite thing about just going through that?
Let me see. I mean, one thing, well, I was very happy at one moment when there was one little piece that did not make it into the film, and it was in one cut. It didn't end up in the final cut. And it's that Lucille was a Cotton Club dancer. So she had her own career. She was also in entertainment. She was, and so that's how she had this money. And maybe it's not important ultimately, but somebody actually said to me, was she a dancer? I hope somebody had seen the film. And just, there was a sense, I don't know, I think she was just incredibly powerful, self-possessed, she was very much they both supported each other. But she really had a lot of backbone in that relationship. And I think it was really expressed beautifully in that story about buying the house. And I will say that she also, after Louis died, put a tremendous amount of effort into creating the foundation, into creating the archives and preserving his legacy. So I think she also really understood his importance to Black history, American history. So I gained a lot of respect for her throughout the process.
Hectah, what did you use as your inspiration for drawing and animating a lot of these scenes that you take you through, the racist aspects, the diners that they weren't allowed to go to, the urinals, they're just trying to find somewhere to go to the bathroom. What did you pull from and research to sort of grasp what you wanted to illustrate there?
A lot of, I styled it up and animated it, but a lot of the work was done by the editors. They already had kind of like images in that part, and then I would listen to it and ask, the archival department to, if I saw something else and I needed something else, then I would ask. Yeah, that's about.
No, the great part that Heck does is the story on the ship, right, where Louis confronts his manager, on the trip to England. And Heck did a fantastic job of illustrating that image. As Louis is telling this really hurtful story about, he's in an argument about money, the manager just throws the N-word at him. And I think the way that Heck, pulls some different images of just not only Louis, but a bottle, a plate smashing. And one of my favorite images is when Louis says all the Black people back up in New York. I don't know where you found this image of, Heck, but this image of this guy with a top hat and a little cigar, which is the funniest thing ever. And there's a great image also as he's talking to Alpha. Heck did a great job of using that image of Louis looking down at Alpha. So it feels like he's talking to Alpha as he's telling the story. It's wonderful, And plus Cold Cart Blues. We put the audio together, but again, Heck really made Storyville and the Cold Cart Blues story come to life, right? With the mule, with the coal, with the smoke coming out the factory, with the women, with the prostitutes in Storyville. All of that was just amazing.
Thanks. I don't know. I think I had when we went to his house, I remember talking to Alma about this. It's like we were walking in, remember we were talking about like asking permission to Louis. And I think there's parts of this project when I was working on it that I was just like, I just was like, that kind of like guide me. Like I felt like, I was touching something that was sacred and I needed feel like it was okay doing it. So I would ask for that. Beyond our realm is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think you did a great job also just honoring Lewis's style, like you said earlier. I think you really tried to replicate what he did, like the colors you chose. Everything was really trying to replicate Lewis's, but also with like a modern twist to really hit on the notes that were being told in each pod.
And Hector, I just imagine you always being artistic, and I'm not at all. So I just imagine that it's just a gift that you have. But when I'm thinking of you 15, 16, I'm imagining that you're not thinking, oh, I'm going to do illustrations for documentaries one day. Like, how did this come to be into fruition, and has it changed what you thought your career would be?
All I do is create. It just, doors open. Even when there's not doors, I just create, and somehow there's like a door open. So I didn't quite think about it. I was doing a little bit of everything, you know, from performing to visual arts, murals, things like that. And then it went to print, then it went into animation, and I don't know, one thing leads to another. But yeah, it's great. It's great. I mean, it's great to tell these stories. It's great. Obviously, working with Sacha is always, you know, great and fun. So I'm enjoying the ride.
Sacha, what excites you about being a documentary filmmaker? Because, you know, you've had your stamp on this genre for some time, and I'm curious what excites you about the genre, especially now that there's so much more access with partners like Apple TV Plus, that you're able to present your work to so many more people.
Well, you know, I started out as a journalist, so for me, it's just journalism with cameras, and print journalism is in a tough place. So this represents where journalism, the future of journalism, and where things are going. So I feel lucky to have transitioned out of traditional journalism into journalism with cameras. But, you know, for me also, my dad was a documentary filmmaker, so I take great pride in being a second generation Black filmmaker, and I take great pride in working with someone like Jason, who's a second generation Black filmmaker. I think that's, you know, super important.
Do any of you have questions for each other that you haven't been asked through all of your publicity rounds that you've been making? Does anyone have anything that they'd like to ask someone else that you've been curious about this whole time?
I would like to ask if anyone has a favorite Louis Armstrong song after this film, or if it changed.
I really like Cold Cart Blues, partially because of Hex animation, but also just knowing what we know now about Louis Armstrong. It just feels like such a real part of his life. He has such a real connection to the song in a way. Feels very visual to me now.
I mean, for me, it's Strutting on Some Barbecue. I mean, I had never heard that song before, but the live version of Strutting on Some Barbecue is great. But Alma, what's that song you use when Louis is meeting people in the dressing room? That's not even a Louis song, really.
It's a cover of How High the Moon by Arville Shaw, the bass player.
How High the Moon by Arville Shaw. There's a section in the film where, you know, people talk about Louis meeting all these different people. You know, it's like it was a cornucopia of people in the dressing room. And Alma first showed me the sequence. I think you started out with the performance, and it freaked me out. I was like, what are you doing? Like, this don't work. This song doesn't work. Alma, what are you thinking? But she worked it. And now that song, it's a great, it doesn't play very long, but the bass line, it's stuck in my head. So those are my two, Strutting on Some Barbecue and How High the Moon. Is a fantastic song.
Were you all able to see this film together? I mean, what was that experience like? Was it when you first saw the film, you know, what was your feeling when you saw the completed version? What was that like? Sacha?
Well, it's such a different experience seeing it on a big screen. It's a completely different experience. So just having the opportunity to see it on a big screen, because, you know, so many of these projects now go straight to TV. It's just, I don't want to say it's old timey, but it really makes you feel like what you worked on is special, that it's special enough to be up on the big screen, you know, because so many films or so many projects don't make it to the big screen. So I had a warm feeling inside. I felt like, the team worked really hard, and it seems like people really appreciate the film, and we did Mr. Armstrong justice. So it felt great.
And just as a final question, I'll ask each of you, what was your favorite takeaway or maybe lesson that you learned either from Louis Armstrong himself or just working on this project that you can take away? I'll start with Alma.
I really value Lewis's self-worth. I think that's something that I took away, was watching how much he valued his own life and his own perspective on life enough to document it and scrapbook it. So I walk away with that value.
And Hectah?
I think it just reinforced the work ethic. Just put your head down, kind of work, be humble. Just all the stuff that exists that is coming out now with the movie, it's insane. Like Arma was saying, it's just, his scrapbooks, all these tapes, and just like, it's amazing. So yeah, just keep your head down and work. As a creative, that's what I got from it.
Amilca?
I think I learned like what a triple threat he was. Like he wrote his own autobiography. He was a letter writer. He was a visual artist through his collage. He was a musician. He was an actor. So I think that just how much he just never stopped creating in all forms. It wasn't just music, that he was just constantly finding vehicles to express himself. So,
Jason, how about you?
I'm just going to mirror what everybody else is saying. I mean, it's fantastic as an artist just to see how many different, ways he was able to express himself, with the collages, with the tape, the tape boxes, with the many letters, with the autobiographies, his stuff in movies. He wasn't just a trumpet player, being a fantastic singer as well, so that was just really inspirational to me to really break outside of a box or a pigeonhole.
And Sacha, just to wrap things up, what did you take away and what do you hope people take away from this film?
Well, it's one thing to be a great artist, and to be a great Black artist during the time he was a great Black artist, but to be able to navigate, that to me is an art in of itself. It's sort of like, I could describe it as a spiritual jujitsu, to be able to navigate Jim Crow and racist managers and gangsters who make you go to New York against your will, and all these other things to rise to the top and get the last laugh. To be able to maintain your composure and get all that done on top of being a prolific artist, that art form in and of itself, I think, is something that is a universal lesson that people can take. Anyone can take that lesson. Like, don't let anyone get in the way of your vision. Don't let anyone get in the way of where you need to go. And he didn't let anyone do that.
Well, it's a fantastic film. It's entertaining, informative, beautiful to watch. Congratulations to all of you for all the attention it's rightfully been receiving. And everyone can go watch Louis Armstrong's Black and Blues streaming on Apple TV Plus right now. And thank you all for joining me for the Spotlight panel today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.